Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster recovery, business continuity, supply chain, crisis management, COVID, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, plan, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free, reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Alex Fullick there, so I'm really easy to find, and I do respond to everything I get. Quick update, I will be speaking at the Continuity Insights Conference, April 25th to 27th in Louisville, Kentucky, and fingers crossed that it'll be an in-person event and that I can travel to go there. I'm still unsure, but I'm really hoping to see some of you in person and maybe get some of you on the show to talk about things that you want to touch on. Many of you will know that over the many months now that I've talked about the BCI World Conference in November 2021, and that I had hoped to be able to get other speakers to come on the show and talk about their topics or a related topic that they wanted to touch on. And today, I'm lucky enough to have one of those speakers here today. And I'd like to introduce on the topic of resiliency in third-party arrangements for IT and ITES organizations are, I hope I say this right, Vaidhyanathan, affectionately known as RV. RV, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, and I'm very excited to be part of the show, and thanks to you for having me in the show.
It's my pleasure to have you here. Now, I know I've got your bio and I've read what you do and things like that, but could you take a minute and talk to our global listeners and tell us what you do and how you got into what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much. And if I have to probably introduce myself, I have to go back about 32 years or 33 years, the overall experience that I've got it. And last 2 decades, I've been into the risk and resilience in the domain that I'm in. It was more of a kind of a learning when I was working for one of those IT organizations, where a couple of clients came back and asked about what is the disaster recovery and business continuity that you have for the organization when I was part of the IT. So I never knew anything. I mean, ABC of BCDR at the time, I'm talking about in 1996 and those times. So that actually triggered me to get into this, to find out what it is. And basically what I knew at that point in time was just taking a backup in a cartridge, taking the backup of that cartridge into another cartridge and putting it into an alternate location. And that was the DR, BCP, all that we knew at that point in time. So there were a few questions that were coming in from few of the clients. Okay, if this entire facility goes off, what will you do? And if the communication fails, what will you do? So all those in terms of people competency, what will you do? All those, there's a question that was coming about, do we had that kind of a preparedness at that point in time was a big question. And I was also not very clear about it. And from there, I got into this and that became my passion right from that time, and got all my certifications to learn it in a structured way. And from there, getting into our large IT corporates and not just doing a day job, I also involved myself in knowledge sharing and getting with many peers within the industry and also sharing the knowledge and whatever learning that the other organization could have. Because I would say BCP is all about preparedness, but definitely every incident will give you one learning or other, how well you are prepared. That's what is my experience till date. And especially when we are talking about the current pandemic stage, when you look at from the earlier incident, every incident used to give one learning or other. But I would say this pandemic has actually given us a lot of learnings in a lot of areas entirely across the BCM, and now predominantly going back onto IT prominence that is coming up, and for which the topic today, which I'm talking about, is something supplier continuity that we're talking about. Since then, I've been into IT organizations, and in between, I wanted to have my hands on other domains and industries, basically into financial and insurance industries, customs, and also in other areas of knowledge sharing organization or knowledge processing organization. So I got onto with a consulting organization for about 3-4 years. Later into the certification organization with British Standard Institution, and that's where a lot of exposure that I've got into certifying many organizations. In the process of what I had and what I learned is something what I am today. And currently heading the uh, basic governance, risk and compliance and client services for a big IT corporate cognizant. And that's what I am today. And it's been a big passion for me. And I also have a couple of the nonprofit professional body which I associated with to share the knowledge, and also in speaking in various conferences that I share and I to learn also, sir. That's what is about me shortly.
Well, welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you here. And it's interesting, you and I started roughly the same time, 1996.
Oh, great.
And
Okay.
both fell into it by
Right.
accident.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we're going to talk about supply chains today. Can you tell us, some of the challenges that organizations have with supply challenges right now? What's happening?
The supply chain, I would say it's not anything new, as the way that we are talking about in BCM also. It is not a rocket science. It's only that the organization doesn't have a focus onto this particular area. At least that's what is my experience and my reading of the situation. So, like the way the BCM, I would say it has been an eye opener for most of the people and professionals of BCM today. The one incident which would not be probably missed out was the WTC. That's the time that we knew about it. People are talking about ITDR, redundancy on that. But what is the other part of, apart from IT, BC thing that need to be focused on, came up from there. And by the time the organization could even stabilize on the business continuity, and supply continuity is one part of it, or a supply chain is one part of it, which was not basically focused. And I would say that is something that has come in now as an uh, learning from the current COVID, whatever that we have been seeing in the last 2 years or so. And it's been very fragile in most of the organization because people thought as one of those risk management area, once I outsource my part of the support to a third party organization, it is thought that the ownership has got transferred to them. It's not. I would rather say the ownership is still lying with the principal organization. I would say the accountability, and only the responsibility part of it is moved into the outsourced or the third party arrangement that they have.
Well,
But have they
what's
taken?
your definition of because you just split that up, accountability, responsibility. How do you see
Right.
those two as being different?
Say, specifically, I have the accountability. The entire thing and ownership lies within myself. Is the accountability? Since I've outsourced it, I cannot just wash away my hands when that the
Mhm.
part of it has been taken to them. It's an assignment, and part of it, I would have one person accountable or the one function accountable. And responsibility is each and every areas of which what has been given to them has to be worked towards together. And the final decision authority in terms of taking it, the either the success and the failure is to be taken by the organization. That's the accountability I'm talking about. And the outsource organization or the third party organization cannot take that. And that's what something is one of those that has come in now because people do not even go beyond the first level of supplier. So when I say I've outsourced it, there could be sub-level of a supplier and a contractor who has been outsourced by the first level supplier. And when it goes to second level, third level, the entire supply chain, if it is not taken care, you're bound to fail. And that's what exactly that has happened in few experiences, whatever that I have seen in the last couple of years.
Do you think that some people, organizations, let's say, uh, became involved with all of these third parties as a way to try and minimize their risk and reduce their accountability, as you were describing, is in the hopes of put it on somebody else's shoulder so it's not our fault. But to your
Absolutely.
point, that's not the way it works.
No, it doesn't work that way. That's what I'm saying. So at least a periodic review, or in the contract, there should have been a certain level of a review mechanism or a right to audit. Today, if you go with a smaller vendor to the biggest vendor, the big fours or whatever that you call it, in terms of the service providers like an organization of telecom or something from a IT or from a data center, not everybody gives you that kind of a right to even audit them. And those are the things that was always a challenge, which I've seen in my organization where I've come through so far. And that is now coming up because the entire supplier commitment on a contractual basis. And today, even an organization which I'm working on is a supplier to our customers. So if our customers fail, our supply chain, whatever that we are doing fails, and we have our own outsourced party or a third party which is supporting us, if the entire supply chain is not taken care as a periodic review, and to the extent of understanding whether they have which of those critical ones that need to be supported during a real-time situation, answer is possibly very few organizations had that focused on, especially where again a requirement that came in. But was it a standard practice? Was it something done proactively? The answer would be no. And it was more of reactive thing in most of the organization. Those organizations which were proactive enough were having very little impact. And I would say those organizations which probably did it in a quick reaction has been able to focus on agility and brought people together and also the supplier were together to manage the situation very well. And from there, a lot of improvements are coming up in terms of regular way of looking at risk of supply chain, which probably wasn't earlier. They considered it not to be very important. Today, it's a high and a medium that comes in, so that they focus on the budgets are coming in and technology is getting deployed and a lot of people are getting in. This becomes a point of topic within the board and many of the organizations across industries. So that's what is the trend that I'm seeing today.
Well, let's talk about that because you keep saying supply chain. However, if I'm an organization, myself, Alex Fullick Incorporated, I'm only dealing with RV. What's the rest do I need to consider? Because I'm looking at RV as the person or the company to supply me what I need. Why do I need to consider what's beyond you?
Yeah, basically, when any organization today doesn't work on their own, in fact, we are dependent. Even today, if you and me are talking, we are dependent on multiple other people who are there in between, like a conference that we are on that should be working, where the servers need to be working, the communication that I have should be working. There are many service providers in between, or the entire service providers. Of course, in this, we don't have much of a control in terms of managing it, but whatever is in my control, and when I'm outsourcing certain things to the third party, I can ensure which of those services are provided by them and which of those are sub outsourced on one which they are dependent on. So when we do a business impact analysis, when the overall business continuity management is being planned, are they getting onto the level of supplier continuity part and on which the supplier is dependent on another supplier, the entire chain that goes in. This was not always it. As I said earlier, it's the first level of a supplier they focus on. They don't even go into checking on any other dependency that they have. That's the supply chain I'm talking about. If there is a failure of end person in the tree that is supporting a very critical services to this supplier, and that supplier is dependent on the end person. If he is not able to take care of that, whatever contract that he is going to sign, and with the principal organization is going to be affected. And that should be taken care. And that's what is now coming up as a trend.
But how do you go about doing that? Because using yourself and myself as the example again, my contract is only with you. You will have contracts, as you described, with other third parties further down the chain that I'm not privy to, that I'm not going to see, but I'm the one asking you questions. So how do I go about trying to find that information out? Because
that is,
there's so many companies these days that say, privacy concerns or anything like that, we don't want to give you that information.
Right, absolutely. But and the part of BCM that we are talking about in terms of taking care of a supply chain or a third party, that is very much required in the sense when we do a due diligence, the questions that we put into them and the request for information that we do along with the supplier and the function that is working within the organization, there could be a contract level of a specific explicit line that could be brought in terms of checking there cannot be anything that is sub outsourced, which could probably be taken, but the dependency part of supplying the service need to be taken care. So that's where you see the organization when the vendor is big and the critical vendor for the business that they have been outsourcing it, they always check the kind of a continuity mechanism and the testing that they have done and what are the dependency that they have. Need not have to ask explicitly and get into a privacy information and all those, but if they are going to take care about it, I specify a time within which I need to support. I am probably committing a timeline to my customer, and that need to percolate down into my supplier saying that I've committed this much of time that I will be up and running. And because you're supporting, this is the time within which you need to do it, which is much lesser than the time that I have probably committed to the customer. So that need to be percolating down into my third party, and as long as they are prepared in terms of managing their impact, considering the dependencies and the supplier, and that is taken care, and they give a commitment, yes, within this timeline, I can support you. And we also test it. And during a real-time situation, we see what is the learning, if they are able to support it. And that's the way that it goes on currently. And this was there for a very long time, but people do not generally come forward in terms of a collaborative way of working. I say this is the contract that I've given. I say a kind of a 99.99 uptime percentage for whatever services that is being provided. But over a period of 1 year, when you look at it, even if 2 or 3 days of a downtime, if you have in a stretch, you will still be able to make up that 99.99. But on a one-time incident, if it's going to be failing for 3 days, your timeline to provide the service is going to get affected. So this is a different ballgame altogether. We need to talk about emergency, the impact that you have. That time SLA is something to be explicitly called out in your contract going forward.
You mentioned collaboration, so that brings up an interesting point. If I'm investigating the supply chain, am I just dealing with you, or do you and I and your third parties get together to talk about? Do we include everybody, or do we just have little segments that we talk to?
So I may not directly interact with a supplier and all those. As I said earlier, it's the basic, the first level supplier, the team that works on. There would be a kind of a point of contact which I would have in the third party who will further check on all this. And I will have a due diligence done, which of those other suppliers on which you are dependent on this service that you're providing to us. Those are the things that will come in very clearly. And I will not always go with each and every third party suppliers who are providing me service. I will identify a critical service for me. It need not have to be all the services, all the suppliers need to be available. I would identify with a kind of a criteria, which are those suppliers are critical. And based on that, I would address, and the services provided by them, which are critical, will be identified. And for those, what are the dependency? What are the kind of continuity that you have? Typically, from a people perspective, the competence that they would have, typically the other infrastructure and support that is required, most of them today, if you look at it, it's happening on a technology perspective. So what is the kind of connectivity that you have? And what is the redundancy in terms of a thing that you have built up? And who are all involved in the chain for you to provide the services? Something as a questionnaire, when it goes in, it's very clear, and a discussion happens over with the first level of people, but considering the information of other supply chain that they have.
And then you bring that to me, right? To make sure that my questions or investigation or whatever is being addressed, right?
Absolutely. That's what would happen finally. And I would ensure completely of those critical services for which I'm outsourcing or taken care. And I don't stop at that. I would also try to do wherever possible a kind of a simulation exercise to just simulate this is what is the scenario, this is what is happening, within what time we can do it. there could be some live exercise wherever possible if it's an IT related stuff on whatever that we are talking about. Unless
Also,
at least a rehearsal is done, we may not be in a position to ascertain that in a real-time situation we will succeed.
so you would recommend doing either a tabletop or some sort of an exercise so we could walk ourselves through a situation
Absolutely.
where RV is unable to deliver something to Alex Fullick.
Absolutely, that's right.
So is that you explained quite a few different things that you would talk about with various suppliers and vendors. Is that what you call supply chain mapping?
Yeah, basically on supply chain mapping, if we talk about, yes, the part of the chain and the dependency that we are talking about, that is where it failed during this time when the COVID came in. Nobody expected that it would grow that big in the sense of complete pandemic. And for that matter, organization, most of the time they were prepared up to 40%, 50% levels of absenteeism, but not to the level that we are talking about today. And that is where the complete set of supply chain mapping is something that was focused on and was coming up. And that is where it failed. And now people are getting back to bring up that complete chain within the agreement and the due diligence. More and more due diligence of 1 in 6 organizations are now getting on to doing specific due diligence in the recent years. And this is somewhere from the survey from a BCI I'm talking about, and 83% of the organization were basically prepared and since now to on to the supplier continuity, focusing it on to improve their supply chain and supplier continuity part of it within there.
Supply chain seems to have supply chain management seems to have grown over the years. I remember when it was just if you supply RV supplies me pens, fine, I'm just going to go somewhere else. It's more than that now, isn't it? It's if RV can't supply me pens, where are the pens RV's receiving is coming from? Like the whole chain behind it now. It's more than just getting a new vendor.
Absolutely. I mean, that's right. I mean, specifically from a manufacturing segment, when you look at it, when there's a lot of things that need to be looked at. I mean, in Far East, when the entire supply chain failed, there have been a lot of impact during this COVID. And from there have been a lot of learnings. And when it became a pandemic, even for a supply of the laptops for work from home, many organizations faced it with a difficulty. And all those that were coming up from a transaction over a consignment and all those that also need to be quarantined. It further delayed it, and the semiconductor industry was stuck in terms of the huge production that has to be done. And all those are the parts that now are getting focused on, and not just one industry, across industries, across different things. The business model itself is now changing, getting digital more and more. And now, because of that digital and the IT getting prominence in it, all the more we need to have more such supply chain and the third party arrangement that you need to ensure so that you are continuing your business, at least for the critical ones. Today, most of the thing that comes back is a work from home. And earlier it used to be one organization. Now it has become multiple such organizations back home, and individuals are left to manage their own risks in terms of my connectivity, which is coming now. It's not a corporate connectivity anymore. It's my own connectivity, be it reimbursing and all those money that could be given. But still, at the end of the day, I own it and I need to ensure. And what is the kind of a mechanism for a power failure that I manage? Do I have a UPS? And again, there comes a supplier who needs to be available within locally. And if a travel restriction is there, how are we going to solve that out? All these are something that need to be thought about. And the entire thing comes in as a holistic planning, not just only from one outsourced third party.
And on that note, we've come to the end of our first segment. Today, we are talking with I want to make sure I get this right because I want to say the whole name.
Vaidhyanathan.
There you
Vaidhyanathan.
go. There you said it for me. Affectionately known as RV.
Sure, yeah, that's right.
That's
much better.
We've come to the end of our first segment, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We are talking today with RV about supply chain management. RV, great information in the first segment there. I just wanted to follow up on a question You were talking about the supply chain and many organizations experiencing struggles right now with that. How do we go about getting some of this information that we're looking for when we're all in the same boat? Because it's one way for me, let's say, to approach RV and say, what are your suppliers? What are you doing? But everybody's in that same boat. So how do you go about doing this?
See, as again, going back, I mean, when we talk about any such process or a program that need to be established, I mean, there need to be a very clear policy. So when we talk about a third party risk management, I mean, the risk is something we need to identify. So typically from a continuity management, we focus on the risk that is getting addressed, and also a three tier that comes in. One is the reduce mechanism through a risk control that you put in place. Another one is a response mechanism when actually the incident is happening, and the recovery part that comes in. So how are we going to address this first level of a reduce mechanism through a very clear third party risk management policy? So it's that you just say what is that we are going to do, which is very important for the organization out of the businesses and services and the third party that they are engaging in. Who are those third party, and what is the criteria with which basically they need to ensure and identify the third party as a critical third party service providers, and all those need to be coming up very clearly, and along with a very clear accountability roles and responsibility need to be coming out within the policy. And this has to be further disseminated within different teams within the organization. And for a particular business and a service to be provided, if you have 5 different suppliers who are key for the organization, whether you have ensured those suppliers continuity through a due diligence. That also due diligence process is very important to be brought in as a part of the policy. And one of the important things is they need to also know about what is the requirement of this organization which is providing services to the customers, and what is the role that they need to play to support this organization to deliver that to the customer, depending upon in which business and which industry are they in. These are something very minimal that we need to start off with, and that's what is now coming up in most of the organization. And without a very clear awareness of a supply chain and a structured understanding, it's going to be pretty difficult. And even those in the supply chain need to understand the entire stuff of it in terms of the time that within which the RTOs, the recovery time objectives, and all those the organization is committing. So education is one important thing that need to be coming up. And once after that is done, the final thing in terms of the governance and auditing them, right to audit for them, or these general things that need to be probably focused on in a very clear policy. And on a periodic basis, it has to be reported both back to the respective suppliers and back to the organization's specific function, which manages this entire third party agreement.
What if somebody doesn't want to respond to some of your questions and give you information because they cite audit concerns or compliance concerns or privacy standard concerns? What should I do if someone turns around and says that to me?
Right. I mean, we need to definitely value the privacy part of it, because that's one other part that every organization need to focus on. And if there is a privacy information that is involved in terms of this entire third party arrangement and information that you're seeking, there can very well be a point of a commitment, that a timeline within which you're doing. What are the risks involved? What is the time within which you can provide service? To that extent, we can have the agreement signed, so that at the end of the day, we have our services taken. I'm not bothered about what is the other information, who is their supplier, and what is the information about supplier that I need, and all those. But as far as you're taking care of that and give a commitment, I will take care of this support or services that I'm providing to you within this time. If I sign it, it's fine. But not all the vendors, as you said, not all the suppliers do that, not just only for the sake of privacy, because there could be certain organizations which do not have a very clear continuity management program or a risk and impact analysis that is done for you to get that commitment from them, and that they try to rather pick up. In my experience, I've seen they bring up with privacy, they bring up with a lot of information that cannot be shared and all those. But at the end of the day, I think my concern to get the service is to check on the timeline within which I need to deliver the services to my customer. If that I'm ensuring without the information, privacy, whatever compromise that I have to do it, I can still go on with it.
So I guess that addresses my next question, because I was going to ask, what if we're following two different standards? I'm following ISO 12345, and you're following ISO standard 34567. There is ways around that.
Right. So to me, if I look at it, man, at the end of the day, the process or a program remains same. The controls, whatever you're talking about, is going to be the same. Risk assessment, the impact analysis, the support, the third-party arrangement, the entire supply chain, the concept remains the same. But the standard may come with a specification of the standard. Doesn't always tell you the methodology in which that you're doing it. It just says that you need to have a robust supply continuity program in place, or the interested parties are also in your line of continuity management that you're fixing it. Those are the things that comes in. So irrespective of any standard that comes in, unless at least it's a guideline, there could be a change of doing it. And so even a debate that goes on generally in the BCM, even after 2 decades or 3 decades of it's coming into existence, which has to be done first, risk assessment or a business impact analysis. So people keep changing it. So that's okay. Anytime you can do it, either do it first there, do it next year, and certain standard says you do the BIA first and then do the risk assessment, because you don't have to spend a lot of time for all the critical activities. So here again, in supply chain, if you look at it, the entire concept remains the same, but the standard might ask for certain 1 or 2, 3 documents, extra more governance and all those. That is something we need to focus on if we have to get certified. Otherwise, without a certification also, there can be a robust supply chain mechanism or a third-party arrangements that can be robust, and the organization can really survive during a real-time situation.
So I'm thinking, as you were talking, that it's more of make sure that they can address the what. How they do it is up to them. I don't have to tell them, how you do this. As long as I get the end result that I'm looking for, that's all that matters, right?
I think you nailed it. I mean, that's the right thing to do it. I mean, in terms of understanding, and at the end of the day, again, for my industry, for my business, which is right, is something I need to do it. For certain businesses, you do not have to have a stringent contracts and a timeline. They could probably wait for 3 days. But for certain situations like a telecom or something on an online trading, they cannot afford to even have a shorter downtime period, whatever that they could have it. So those areas, the methodology, the control in terms of having a arrangement with a third party differs, but that's where the how is based on the organization's objective and the kind of outsourcing to the extent that they have done.
How long does this take to do an assessment of your entire supply chain? And that's part one. Part two is, how often do I need to do it?
Okay, so it depends upon the number of suppliers that you have and the kind of a chain that you have within the service that I've been provided till the last person in the supply chain tree. So that would decide the kind of depth and what is the coverage and all. That's where I said a policy and an overall program that need to be brought in. For a smaller organization with lesser suppliers, you may probably end up doing it in just 6 months to start off right from scratch and to complete it, and coverage of whatever that you need to take it. But for a bigger, large corporate globally, and also to look at the kind of suppliers, and I know of organizations which still have about 12,000, 13,000 different suppliers across the globe, but not all going to be a critical supplier. That's where the criteria that comes in very clearly as to who are the critical suppliers. So what are those criteria? It could be a single point of failure of a one location specific vendor or a supplier who's available. They are not globally present. And every time today in the travel restrictions, a supplier cannot even travel, and they should have arrangements with other people across the globe to provide the service. And if when we sort of looking at that particular supplier as a critical supplier, then we need to have a criteria very clearly. This supplier is very critical because he is just a single vendor. And also the service provided, it could be a monopoly, but still, do they have some kind of a franchisee to provide your services is something you can look at. And multiple locations is something that's required. However close that they are, they can get the services immediately. And whether their franchisee is also competent enough as the principal supplier who they have outsourced further. All those are things that comes in the education part, which I was talking about, that need to be looked into, wherein we would have to probably focus on and take it up. So, coming back to your question, the answer is depending upon the number of suppliers and the criticality of the suppliers, the kind of business, it varies. And what was your second question on that?
The part two is, how often do I do this? Because the answer to your first one is
Okay.
that it could be, let's say, up to 6 months.
Yeah.
So does that mean I do it
Right.
again in 6 months, or what?
Yeah. So, as specifically in terms of establishing it, if depending upon the organization size and all those, in terms of the supplier responding back to you in time and all those, is something that is also going to come in, and their implementation back in their organization is also biggest one that we are looking at. So, having said that, the kind of frequency could be, you can decide the rate and change the number of suppliers and the kind of services that they are providing. If it's critical, and they also have multiple moving areas in terms of the people moving in quite frequently from the supplier when they have the competence that comes in. So, as far as the frequency is concerned, I mean, it comes from the policy which I said. The policy will be made based on the size of organization and the number of suppliers and whatever that you look at it. Typically, it could be an annual refresher of a large organization when you're talking about. If it's a smaller organization, you can do it once in 6 months and all those. But even to complete the entire cycle when they started afresh now, it might take about a year and a half. And that could be the first effort that can be put in. And later, they could start off with initial 6 months and then get on with 1 year. So once there's a stabilizing annual change or a review, could be a one thing that can be addressed in the policy. And the other part is any supplier change. Supplier could have been getting an acquisition into another company, or some significant change in the original status quo to something that changes. Then that would be a trigger. Need not have to wait for a 1 year or a 6 months as per the cycle, but any significant change, or they have multiple other outsourcing, they are being bought out, or they have multiple other dependencies and sub outsourcing that happens, then there is a need for you to revisit on that, and your due diligence again starts, and because the information changes. So that's something that could be done on a significant changes.
So there is an opportunity to embed some of this into the organizational operational activities, like project management offices, when a merger acquisition, using your example, happens, to actually make this assessment part of the project, right?
Absolutely. And when you look at even the merger acquisition, anything happens with my outsourced party, I mean, this need to be probably a communication is very much important between the supplier. There should be a supplier periodic supplier review meet and a performance management, all those that need to be as part of the policy and to be executed with a better governance. Today, I would rather say not many organizations have a very clear governance with a clear accountability at one function, because it's left to the individual functions in general, but a holistic picture will be coming in now with the technology that is being deployed, and more into tools, and how it can be automated with the alerts and other things that comes in, and the supplier themselves are allowed to log in with a secure way of doing it, and what is that need to be done, and in a real-time situation incidents are also managed the same way, and all those are coming up. So I think that's the way forward that we are looking at. And from now to next 3 years, 4 years, I think this will be the buzzword when we were talking about initially a BCM, then organization resilience. I think among that, this third-party arrangements and the supply chain would be the biggest one based on the learning that we had from the pandemic.
But yeah, I agree with you, because there are so many We're seeing pictures, we're hearing all kinds of stories on the news of empty shelves. We can't build these cars anymore because we need parts that come from the other side of the world. We're worrying so much about it. If we don't learn about this, who knows what the future is going to look like. But I'm wondering, what if I'm in an organization, Alex Fullick, we already have a supply chain management process in place, but it's not as effective as it should be. How can I enhance it? How do I make it better? What are some of the things, as you talk about, enhance the third party arrangements? What are some of the things that I could do?
See, typically from any of those management systems that you have, there is a continual improvement as a process. It could be because of something like an incident that we had, or it could be based on an audit that is being done back by the organization based on a self-assessment where we stand, and a typical competitor where they stand is something that could be probably a starting point. But specifically from a risk and opportunity, what are those that is there now? And it normally is a tendency of organization and people, now that we are talking about, supposing the pandemic is over and this is gone and some other incident triggers some other area, that is forgotten. So this supply chain comes to a point and okay, they say I'm fine and no problem. The next time when it comes in, I can look at it. It should not be the scenario. As I said, it has to be an ongoing thing, and risk and opportunities, when you're actually conducting a risk assessment every year or every 6 months, whatever be the duration, this also needs to be part of that overall embedding thing within the risk assessment as part of your business continuity. And then it becomes easier for us, and especially focusing on the single points of failure. That's something very, very important because that's what we are now looking at. And now within the new model, the new normal or whatever that we are calling it, there are a lot of such things that comes up. And today, if my laptop fails while I'm talking or something, and how quick I can fix it up, I need to go back to office or something. And there are organizations which have an arrangement with local vendor, or they have a break fix van to fix up immediately with whatever. When I call up and they probably set out people to fix my laptop, it's the first thing that they can be setting it up within my house itself. Otherwise, they have a replacement standby provided, transfer all the data, and over a cloud that we are working, the laptop taken back. So these kind of things are certain things coming up. And what is the kind of a mechanism if the entire supply chain that fails? It has to be not just only from the principal organization. As I said, the requirement for organizations need to get certified through the supply chain. So if I'm certified for ISO, is that enough? Or the suppliers organization is also going to do it, then I can probably demand them, why can't you get certified? I mean, that also goes in. That's a trend I've seen earlier, but now it's going to catch up as my reading of the situation. And by that, it goes in, and by organization due diligence also will have questionnaires of asking about a certification of ISO and specific. But people still feel, yeah, my organization was ISO certified, but it depends on the effectiveness within which it is done. It's not just going to be a tick list. Though I have a checklist, I just do a tick and that becomes a tick list. It should be done in terms of effectiveness, how effective I am. So yes, the organization said the supplier continuity, whatever that they have, they can provide within this timeline. But it's my responsibility or accountability to go and check what are the kind of a thing that they do a due diligence, or right to audit. I go there and visit them and find out, or be part of their exercise when they are conducting it. All those are certain things that we can probably bring it. And this is not the only limited point that I'm talking about. There could be many other, depending upon many different industries as the way that they are looking at. A lot of creativity and innovations are required. Unless man, that we have today, and whatever it's going to be just a thought process that is there. It's going to be out of box thinking. Something that you do differently are the one that would help you to be effective. So those are the ones that we need to do. And the third party disruption from their side and a communication back into the organization need to come in very quickly. Communication is a challenge also. If even the supplier fails on certain areas, how frequently or how soon they are able to communicate back to the principal organization. it doesn't happen because they don't want to come back with negative information that I'm not able to provide service. They will try to fix it up and come back. But nevertheless, there can be a contract. Within that failure, you need to intimate the organization within such and such time. Something that could also be brought in as part of the contract. Contract can be made stringent as far as the mutual relationship is there on all those, and it's being taken care. But still, we have across the globe, there are challenges where suppliers, third parties do not sign for certain requirements on SLAs or a timeline within which to be done. But that's an ongoing thing. Otherwise, you and me will not have a work to do. I mean, if everything goes on smoothly. So these are the point that comes in right away. And look, compliance for third party agreement always, and the periodicity that we are talking about is the one that would help organization to be robust in this third party arrangements, specifically with my limited knowledge and experience that I've shared today. And I think it would be useful for many of those who are coming up and to the organization which are gearing up for the supplier continuity and supply chain in the ITS industries specifically.
Well, we've only got about 3 minutes left, but you mentioned something that caught my attention. You can't do the supply chain management assessment in a silo because you mentioned BCM, risk group, vendor management, and a couple of others. That to do it properly, you've got to work together, right?
Absolutely. That is what is the point I was mentioning. When a governance part that comes, the risk assessment that is done, it could come up with a kind of a gap in one of those supplier area, the dependency that we would have. You need to connect the dots. It can come from different areas. So when we have that many information coming from different aspects of it, the continual improvement will have to be a very clear from a corrective action based on the incident it could come in, based on the external audit it could come in. That's what I said. From all those spaces, you need to probably do it. An assessment has to happen with all the critical suppliers. That doesn't mean you leave out the non-critical one, because the critical and non-critical is just probably a demarcation between the timeline only. Today, if it is not up in the next 2 days, the non-critical suppliers also become critical. So we need to be very careful about it and try and take it with a holistic way of approaching it for effectiveness.
Right. And on that note, we've come to the end of the show. RV, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the opportunity given to me, and have a nice evening.
My pleasure. You gave a lot of information about supply chain management, and you're right. This is going to be a big thing over the next year or two, and maybe even longer. Who knows? Because after some of these assessments are done, we may find that we don't want to do business with some organizations, because they're just not meeting our needs, the way we thought they would.
That happens.
Yeah.
That happened. That's where the due diligence comes in very clear. That's where many of the organizations started doing it, because they want to be sure they don't want to take a headache of some organization failing down the line. So at a due diligence stage, they do it, check everything, and then take it up so that they work as a partner together and deliver to the customers accordingly. That's it.
Yeah. So thank you so much, RV. I really appreciate it. And everybody watching and listening, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.